Welcome to this video on Chapter 11. In Chapter 11, we're talking about the structure of information in writing. We're going to talk a lot about the differences between speech and writing. So this is stuff that's going all the way back to Chapter 1 at the beginning of the semester. So if you need to refresh your memory on that, you can go back and look at the PowerPoint, the chapter in your textbook, the videos that we covered in Chapter 1. But the aspect of speech we're going to specifically be looking at is intonation. Intonation is one of the most important aspects of spoken language. And it's one of those aspects of speech that is completely absent in writing. So something that is so important for language and communication in speech, now we are trying to communicate in writing. How do we compensate for that lack of intonation? And you can see here from my picture, I have a picture of actor Matthew Perry, who recently passed away. And in memory of him, I am going to show you now a very short clip of some of the dialogue that he spoke as his character Chandler Bing in the hit TV show Friends, and we'll talk about the importance of intonation in your speech with regards to the video. So let's take a look. It's about 1 minute long here.
Please, could she be more out of my league? Ross, back me up here.
He could never get a woman like that in a million years.
Thank you, buddy.
Could you want her more?
Who?
Dee, the sarcastic sister from What's Happened.
Chandler?
Couldn't be more out.
They do me?
You know, like, okay, could that report be any later?
He gets it back, pass to the middle, lines it up, and yes! Could that shot be any prettier?
Look at me. I'm Chandler. Could I be wearing any more clothes?
Could we be more white trash?
Korea is such a beautiful country.
With such a sad history.
Yeah.
Could there be more Kims?
But we had our best friend's interest at heart.
Could I be more sorry?
I thought I heard a man's voice before.
No, I was just doing Chandler's side of the conversation. You know, like, hi, how do I look? Really sexy. Could I be any more turned on? You know,
Okay, so we can see that there's always that emphasis on the word be, as I've written here. Could she be more out of my league? Notice to try to capture that vocal quality in my written quote here. I capitalized the verb be. So one way we can try to imitate this change in intonation in writing is through capitalization. Maybe you can bold the word or put the word in italics or somehow a different color, put it in quotes, some kind of way, stylized way to change your writing to signal to the reader that this word is being emphasized. But it's difficult to really capture that intonation, right? Because we use it for so many different things. When I'm talking, right, am I being sarcastic? Am I angry? Am I trying to be funny? Is it a question? Am I confused? There's so many different ways that I can change my voice quality, change the pitch of my voice, the tone, and it's almost impossible to capture that in writing.
Please, could she be more out of?
So, a few things to note about intonation that your textbook goes over. Number one, no one speaks in monotone. No one talks like this. It would be very unnatural. That's what many people complain about when they call a 1-800 number and they get the robot voice or the computer voice. It just sounds unnatural because the intonation's off, right? Secondly, the human voice has a kind of music to it. No matter what language you're speaking, you know, there's a rhythm and tone when we're speaking. Again, there's those linguistic cues that go beyond the simple, just the words that are coming out of mouth for ways in which we can communicate with each other, like things like emotion. Thirdly, that higher pitch is going to be reserved for content words. So if you remember your content words from chapter 2, those are the major parts of speech, the verbs, adverbs, the nouns, and the adjectives. If I say, I went to the store to buy some milk, store and milk are going to go up in pitch, right? Because those are the content words. Your articles, your prepositions, to, of, with, your conjunctions like and, or, but, those minor parts of speech, those are usually going to be de-emphasized, de-stressed, so they'll be in the lower pitch. I went to the store and bought some milk, right? Lastly, the highest pitch usually falls on the newest information. I bought some milk, right? What did you buy at the store? The milk, that's the important information. That's the new information that I'm conferring to whoever is listening to me, right? So, new information, higher pitch. We typically, you know, in just kind of standard speech pattern, we'll put that new information that we're emphasizing at the end of a sentence. This is called end focus. You're talking about your school subjects and you tell someone that your favorite subject is history. My favorite subject is history. That book cost $50. Yak's milk is pink. Okay. The new information that we're giving to the listener is usually going to come at the end, and it gets that highest pitch. So your pitch rises on that new information. There are exceptions, though, because speech is not limited to in focus. That's kind of the default, but it doesn't have to be. So as we saw in our example from Chandler, could she be more out of my league, right? He was, a lot of those quotes, he was kind of being sarcastic. He was trying to be funny, the funny guy. So some word like the verb be got emphasized, but we can see, we can take the same exact sentence, the same exact words, and we might want to emphasize the she. Could she be more out of my league? Or could she be more out of my league? You can imagine many different ways to say the same sentence while we move that in, we change the rhythm of our speech. We change which words are being emphasized, which ones are being stressed, which ones are being said at a higher pitch. You know, is it a question? Is it, again, is it sarcasm? Is it surprise? You know, what is the new information? What is the information we want to emphasize we have that tool at our disposal with speech. But with writing, we don't have that tool. So with writing, word order is more important than in speech. Speech can be more fluid. I've got facial expressions. I've got hand gestures. I don't just have intonation. Writing is more limited, and so that's where word order comes to be much more important. So look at these two examples here. Pause the video if you have to. Read them. I suggest you read them out loud and decide which one sounds more natural to you. In both examples, the first sentence is the same. I came home and found a delicious cake on the counter. I've introduced the information about the cake. So in the second sentence, right, cake would be the old information. So if you look at your first example, the cake is the subject. It, right? It had been baked by my roommate. And now I'm introducing the new information, which is the person who baked the cake, my new roommate, right? So my roommate gets the end focus. It would go up in pitch, right? And I am emphasizing that new information. In the second example, my roommate had baked the cake. Well, that seems like a more standard sentence, subject, verb, object. My roommate had baked the cake, but for some reason, it feels less natural, right? We're introducing the new information, my roommate, as the subject of the sentence, and the end focus, where the reader will come to a natural stop, is on the cake. But we already talked about the cake in the previous sentence. We know about the cake. That's the old information. And so even though the word order in the second example is your standard word order, subject, verb, object, it seems less natural, right? The first example, it had been baked by my roommate. That's passive voice, sounds a lot better because we are putting the new information last. Check out these three pairs of sentences again. If you have to, pause the video and read them out loud and decide which of each pair sounds more natural. Which one is giving me old information first, new information last? Okay, in the first pair, the first sentence introduces these taboos. So in the second sentence, the taboos will be the old information. So number 2 gives us the old information first. One of them, and then the new information, saying Macbeth aloud. The new information gets the end focus. So number 2 is how this information would normally be written. Out of number 3 and 4, I hope you can see that number 3 is more natural. We have a parallel structure. We have a little pattern, right? There's a little flow here. Our northern neighbor is Canada. Our southern neighbor is Mexico, right? The new information that I'm introducing to the reader is the name of the country. So that should go last. Whereas in number 4, I have this odd situation, this odd structure where the first sentence ends with Canada, but the second sentence begins with Mexico. And the sentences fall out of parallel structure. So number 3 sounds better to me anyway. And likewise, number 5 sounds better. That sounds more natural. A speaker needs this, a hearer needs that or desires that. and maximum clarity would be sort of the newer information that I'm introducing to the reader. And the sentences have this pattern and this parallel structure. There are other examples. If you want to check them out on page 197 in your textbook, and you can see which sentences are more natural sounding. So if I want the old information first and the new information last, one way I can do this is through inversion. I can take what would be the standard kind of default word order, and I switch things around. So in the first example we have here, quite breathtaking was the view. In standard word order, I would start with my noun phrase as my subject, the view. Then my be verb was, and then my adjective phrase, quite breathtaking. But if, for whatever reason, you need to emphasize the view, or you're introducing this to your readers, right, in a certain way, we can do this inversion. I don't have the context for this sentence. We would need the whole context of whatever we were reading. But this is one way one tool a writer has to refocus the reader's attention. In the second sentence in the corner, sat a strange man. Again, the normal default word order, a strange man, the noun phrase would be your subject, sat, and then we'd have our prepositional phrase in the corner. But maybe this is a story. I can imagine this being in a novel, and the author is introducing this mysterious new character to the readers. So your protagonist is looking around and looks in the corner, and in the corner is sat a strange man. So a strange man is this new character, this new element that's being introduced into the story. So we want to move a strange man to the end of the sentence to get that end focus. And the same with over the mountains came the cavalry, right? The cavalry are appearing before us in this description. All of a sudden, these men are riding over the mountains on their horses. And so we want that cavalry to get the end focus. We want to put it at the end of the sentence. So again, one way that one method writers can use to emphasize or focus the attention of the reader on something. Okay, we're talking about inverting things, moving things around. That idea might sound very familiar, okay, to you. One more example, inversion. Again, you see this a lot in like a story or a history. We're introducing these tribes. From Denmark came the Jutes. From the south came the Angles and Saxon. From the west came these people. From the north came these people. The new information that I'm introducing to the reader are these tribes. I want to, say, here are the Jutes, here are the Angles, here are the Saxons. So I can invert these sentences to boom, boom, boom. Okay. This inversion sounds very familiar to you. Okay. It sounds like passives, right? It's very similar to passives. If you remember from chapter 8, we're taking what would normally be the object of a sentence, right? Of a transitive sentence, and we're moving it to the front, right? It's another type of inversion, right? So an active voice, active sentence, a crocodile attacked Ludwig. What if, for whatever reason, again, I want to change the order of this information? Ludwig was attacked by a crocodile. Okay. What is the new information here? Was I already talking about the crocodile? Therefore, crocodile would be the old information. Ludwig would be the new information. I might put it in active voice. But if I was already talking about this man or boy, and So Ludwig is the old information, and now the crocodile would be the new information. I might make it passive voice to put crocodile at the end of the sentence. Again, we don't have context, right? You have to ask yourself, what is the old information? What is the new information? What do I want the reader to focus on? And that will determine your word order. So let's look at another example. Standard word order. The butler murdered the oil baron. Subject, verb, object. If I wanted to if I wanted to put the oil baron as the subject of my sentence, I could use passive. The oil baron was murdered by the butler. Now the butler gets that in focus. But I have another structure at my disposal. I can use this it-cleft. I could say something like, it was the butler who murdered the oil baron. This allows me to retain the butler toward the beginning of the sentence to give the butler the importance of being, he's not technically the subject of the sentence. The subject is this weird pronoun it that doesn't really refer to anything, but the butler is still before the verb. So the butler is retaining some of the importance of being the subject of the sentence, but he's being pushed further down the sentence by this it-cleft, which gives him a little bit of the in focus, right? We said, new information gets put at the end. So it kind of tells the reader that this is where your voice needs to rise. This is where your attention needs to focus. And if you were reading this aloud, you would emphasize, your pitch would rise with the butler. It was the butler who murdered the oil baron, right? These little grammar words, it was the, are going to be de-stressed, de-emphasized, and then butler, our first content word, our pitch rises. So again, one tool at a writer's disposal to help the reader understand, hey, what's the new information here, right? What should we be focusing on? Very similar type of structure is a there sentence. So if we look at a standard default sentence, a hurricane is approaching the area. Again, standard transitive sentence, subject, verb, object. If I wanted to emphasize hurricane and give it the in focus, I could make it a passive sentence, passive voice. The area is being approached by a hurricane. So I could write it like that. But just like the it-cleft, I could also do something like, there is a hurricane approaching the area. So very similar to the it-cleft, hurricane stays toward the front of the sentence, right? So it has some of the flavor of being the subject, but it's not the very first thing. It gets pushed back a little bit, which allows it to have a little bit of the flavor of having some end focus. So we get these words, there is, and then boom, our first content word, hurricane. It gets that stress. There's a hurricane approaching the area. And if we were, if you read that sentence out loud, hurricane gets that higher pitch, that higher tone. So it gets a little bit of a focus and kind of grabs your attention as a reader. You see it all the time in stories. Once upon a time, there was a boy. There was a princess. there was a mean old witch. Okay, there was blank. What comes after gets your end focus, right? It gets the emphasis, it gets the higher tone, the higher pitch. It's our new information. We're introducing this character, this person, right? So to introduce them, once upon a time, there was a, and then, and then you're going to have whatever there was. There was an old woman who lived in a shoe. Okay. Another way we can change the word order to change where, what information is more important for the reader is we can change the placement of these modifiers. If you remember your modifiers from chapter 10, we talked about adjectivals and adverbials in these three sentences. If you remember your adverbials, we have the adverbial before the ink was dry. Before the ink was dry, that's a subordinate clause, a dependent clause, right? It's telling us when Justine broke the contract. If you look at the first sentence, we're putting the adverbial at the beginning of the sentence, right? So that means that broke the contract gets our end focus. So in this sentence, we want the reader to focus on Justine's actions. In the second sentence, I moved my adverbial to the end of the sentence, and therefore the end focus will be on before the ink was dry. And in this sentence, I want the reader to really focus on the speed that she broke the contract. She broke this contract immediately, very quickly, right? Before the ink was dry. In the third sentence, I put my adverbial in the middle, right between the subject and predicate. That necessitates putting some commas around it. And as you know, when you're reading something and you get to a comma, that tells you that you need to have a little pause, right? You're going to take a breath, stop for just a half a second, right? Even if you're reading in your brain, the comma kind of stops you for a second. So Justine, pause, before the ink was dry, pause, broke the contract. Her actions broke the contract, still come at the end of the sentence. They get the end focus. But by sticking this subordinate clause right after Justine, by making the reader pause for a second, we are giving some attention there. We're directing the reader's attention to Justine, right? We want them to linger just a second, a little half second on her name. And so we're kind of pointing a finger at her. So again, all of these choices are being made by a writer, by you, if you are the writer, in order to convey some kind of information to the reader. Where should the reader focus their attention? What should the reader be paying attention to? This is something we can do with intonation. When we're talking, I can really say things in a certain way to grab your attention. But in writing, I need to use word order to achieve the same effect. I can also choose the words themselves. Which words do I choose in order to focus your attention? Chapter 11 touches on word choice a little bit, but because chapter 12 will be all about word choice, we're going to skip that section in chapter 11 right now. So that's page 205 and page 206 in your textbook. You can safely ignore that for right now. We'll talk about word choice in chapter 12. What I do want you to pay attention to is page 207. There's a few comprehension questions at the end of the chapter. Okay. If you can answer these questions on a future quiz or on your final exam, then you'll be in good standing, okay? So the first question, how does intonation help us understand spoken language? We just talked about that at the beginning of this video a little bit. It's touched on in chapter 11 of your book, and of course it was way back in chapter 1 as well. So the importance of intonation in speech. Number 2, why is it disadvantageous to write the same way we speak? A lot of my students will write something that sounds like basically they just wrote down what they would have said. But that's not how we write. That's not really writing. Writing is not speech written down. We don't just kind of talk and then transcribe our speech and then write it down. That's not how it works. Writing is a whole different beast, okay? There are different characteristics of each. So if we just sat there and wrote down exactly how we would say it, there are going to be some problems for the reader. So knowing what those issues are. Number 3, what purpose does word order have in written English? We just talked about that in this video, how important word order is for writing, how it's being used to compensate for those features of speech that are missing in writing. So if you can talk about that. And then number 4, describe several ways that exist to change a reader's intonation by changing word order. So if I was imagining somebody reading my stuff out loud, if I wrote something and said, okay, if somebody was reading my things out loud, where would they put the intonation? What would be stressed? What would be emphasized? So we just talked about several ways to do that in this chapter. Passive voice, those it-clefts, the their sentences, okay, inversion, okay. We talked about in focus. So changing word order. If you can answer these questions and the other questions on page 207, if you want to answer them and send me the answers by email and get my feedback before you have to try to answer these for a grade on an assessment, feel free to email me. I don't mind giving my feedback. Thank you for watching. You have my email if you need it. If you have any questions, let me know. You have a quiz coming up if you haven't taken it already. There will be one more quiz after that, your 5th and final quiz, and then the midterm. Please make sure to go onto Moodle and vote yes or no, whether or not you would like to attend a live Zoom session to review everything before the final exam. See you next week.